Hi folks, Pastor Steve Herring here again. We're going to pick up with part 2 of our Bible study now for Wednesday, December the 16th, 2020. We're talking about the origins of Christmas, and in order to talk about the origins of Christmas, we've been talking about the origins of the Christian church. What we covered in part 1 was that the Christian church in the form we know it, that is to say, a church formed around Pauline Christian doctrine, began in what would be Syria. We can pretty well start with Damascus, really, and work up and around the Mediterranean basin, going westward to Rome. In the time of the work of the ministry of the Apostle Paul. And I also believe the Apostle John was significantly active in that business of forming what would become the Christian church. And as far as traditions were concerned, the traditions were largely limited to the towns and the local regions where these churches were established. But by the end of the life of the Apostle Paul, we had a well-formed Christian church established in Rome. Now, the message caught on in Rome. It caught on in Roman culture. It caught on very solidly and spread from the east toward the west. Now, the Roman provinces went all the way to Britannia, the island of Britain, Hispania, Spain, North Africa, all of North Africa, all the way across, was all along the coast, Roman. And so wherever Romans went, in the years following the death of Paul and the death of John, by now with the death of John, we're closing out the first century, so into the second and third centuries, this message spread. It was a message of salvation for eternal life by believing in the lordship of Jesus Christ, by confessing one's sins, repenting of one's sins, receiving the blessings of the power and presence of Christ, that one would overcome hardship and death. Pretty popular message, and it was, and it spread. It spread among common people. It spread among a lot of soldiers and others. Now, Rome was having a war after war after war with the northern tribes, the tribes of northern Europe. So there were Roman outposts in Dacia, what would be southern Germany and France, in that region. They really didn't get much further than that. The Romans didn't, because, well, it was just really difficult for them to be in that cold weather, and with those ferocious tribesmen of the north who just proved to be virtually undefeatable by the Roman army, because they just had a very different way of living. To digress briefly, if I could, the Romans, when they fought the Germans, they felt like these Germans were all brothers, that they fought like a family. So in other words, every one they were fighting was the brother of every other one. So if they killed one, another one was there saying, "You killed my brother." And this made fighting them very difficult. So the Romans called them Germanii. Germanii, brethren. They were all brothers, all the same. It was also kind of a put down in the sense that if you've seen one, you've seen them all. They were all the same, these Germanii. And that also, by the way, linguistically is the relationship of German, G-E-R-M-A-N, and germ, G-E-R-M. Because a G-E-R-M, when you look at it under a microscope, they all look the same. And same thing with the Germans in the eyes of the Romans. In any case, the problem was that the Romans just couldn't defeat these people, couldn't colonize them, couldn't make them Roman. And so they had to retreat from that northern frontier. Same thing happened in England with the Scots. Wasn't going to happen. Hadrian built a wall and said, that's as far as we're going to go. We're not going north of Britannia. We're not going to colonize or conquer Scotland or Ireland or any of those places, because it was just impossible. And they never made it up into Sweden or Norway, where the ancestors of the Vikings would be either. So what happened, though, was the faith, the Christian faith, spread with that Roman army, because there were all these differences in how these kingdoms and empires would rule themselves, you see. But every human being, every person in all of Europe wanted to receive that gospel message of forgiveness, salvation, and eternal life. That message was spread, and spread quickly. And so you had increasing numbers of Christians. Now, in the early 300s, Constantine, who was the Eastern Roman emperor, by the 300s, the Roman Empire had split in half between a western half and an eastern half. And the eastern half had more defensible cities, cities with better walls, cities that could be defended better, kingdoms that were much more established by tradition and therefore could be better organized. And so the Eastern Empire was easier to defend than the Western Empire. Rome was having prodigious difficulty defending these outposts that they had created all the way to Britannia. They were having just tremendous difficulty defending them against the marauding Gothic northern tribesmen. And so one by one, those northern and western outposts of the Roman Empire fell to those Gothic, Germanic, Bavarian, Scandinavian, Scottish, British, marauding tribes. And gradually then what Western Europe would become was a loose, disorganized confederation of tribes who mostly spent their time fighting with each other. The Eastern Empire became a lot more solidified, and this is why Constantine took up residence in Constantinople, what is now Istanbul, on the Bosphorus in Turkey, right at the eastern edge of what is considered to be Europe. So the church really got itself going in the east. In the west, the church had its headquarters in Rome, but every 30 or 40 years or so, Rome was being attacked by these tribesmen, and Rome was becoming increasingly difficult to defend, and the tribes were just taking over. They took over the kingdom, but they themselves would be taken over by the faith, and so people became increasingly more Christian. But you had an Eastern church and a Western church. Now, the the celebration of Christmas. Well, as this early church came to be established in the East and in the West, in the years after Constantine, there would be a high holy day to celebrate the birth of Christ. This high holy day was just another holy day in a year filled with holy days, because the church would organize feasts pretty much really every month or so. They would have some kind of feast, some kind of observation of some element of the Christian year, in which the church would have a special Mass. And the Christ Mass was in the 10th month of the year. The point we're going to get into in the next section is going to be about how it was that the early church borrowed festivals, festivities, feasts, and observances from the various Gentile tribes that were conquered or unconquered, if I could say that. You know, the Romans conquered these tribes, and then the tribes conquered the Romans. That's pretty much what happened, a kind of back and forth. The faith spread anyway, regardless of who held the political power. The faith continued to grow, and in order to assist the faith in growing, various traditions were borrowed from various tribes and incorporated into the fabric of the high holy days as they were celebrated. The two big ones, the Christ Mass in the 10th month and the Mass of Easter in the time of what would be the spring solstice. So we're going to follow that a little bit in the third part, and then in the fourth part we're going to look at the modern birth of Christmas starting in the 1800s.